Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. So today we're going to be going through the primary results from 2016 and the presidential election results from 2016 and 2018 election data to pretty much show what we should be seeing in the primaries tomorrow for both the GOP and the Democrats. So right away, these two states are two states that were won by Donald Trump in 2016, but they were both swing states. Neither of them overwhelmingly went to the president. Arizona did more than Florida, but it was still a Republican state at that point in time. Right now on your screen is the 2016 primary results from the state of Arizona, and over here are the primary results from the state of Florida. And obviously in both of the states there are more Republican voters because Republicans typically get out to vote more in terms of primary elections and other midterm elections and other off-year elections, whereas Democrats typically do much better in terms of the presidential elections, not just on the electoral map scale, but in the United States House of Representatives. Donald Trump was elected, but the Democrats gained 6 seats, or in the Senate, Donald Trump was elected, but the Democrats gained 2 seats. So still the Democrats do better a little bit in terms of Senate and House races, and sometimes gubernatorial elections, even when they may not win the Electoral College. Now that we are looking into 2018, there is no top Republican at the top of the ticket. We're looking at the governor race and the Senate race, but mainly focusing on the Florida governor race and Florida Senate race and just the Arizona Senate race, because the governor race in the state of Arizona is not as contested as it might seem compared to the Senate race. If we look at our screen right now, there are 530,000 voters in the Republican primary, so still a considerable amount, around 500,000, where the Democrats only had 409,000 voters. So we should see around these same type of numbers, the same type of ratio, where the Democrats are not getting as much as the Republicans, and by a considerable amount too. It shouldn't be a narrow majority for, narrow plurality actually for Republicans, where the Democrats are just thousands of votes behind. They should be at least 100,000 votes behind if the GOP wants to show good implications in terms of the United States Senate race here coming up in 2018, which the Democrat is actually leading in right now. In the state of Florida, the GOP should do phenomenal here in terms of turnout. They should do much better than the Democrats. The ratio should be around the same, especially since Donald Trump was able to win this, and if it just shows the Democrats are more excited and they come out and vote in the primary, which isn't too contested in terms of the Senate race and not so much in the governor race. Overall, I mean, the 2016 Democratic primary was more contested than the governor race here, but right now when we look at these numbers, the GOP should do very, very well in terms of primary turnout. If they don't, that may be the first warning sign for the GOP, because it shows excitement from a state that Donald Trump carried, two states that Donald Trump carried, and both Republican states, Arizona more Republican than Florida. However, it'll still show something that the Democrats are able to get more voters than the Republicans. So that'll be considerable for the Democrats. If they don't do it, the GOP should be gaining more voters. It shouldn't be by a narrow margin, because that's not something that will eventually help them in 2018. Maybe just very narrowly, but for right now, when we look at these numbers, they should be replicated. We look at the primary results tomorrow, especially looking at the results in terms of the presidential election out of Arizona and Florida. Right now, Donald Trump won the election, but it was only by around 4%. And still looking at this map, the Democrats probably can do pretty well. I mean, Hillary Clinton was able to get around 45%, which means that the Democrat in a Democratic wave year could possibly do better than that. Donald Trump did not win a majority in the state. He won a plurality. So that means that the Democrats do have a possibility of winning here. When we look at these numbers now, they pretty much do show what we saw in terms of the primary turnout. We see more Republican voters, more excited Republican voters, and Donald Trump was able to win here. This was a swing state that Clinton was actually leading in some polls at a certain point in time, and also the House races are pretty contested. There are 4 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and now one of those races are expected to go to the Democrats, flipping it from 4 to 5 to 5 to 4. And if we look at Florida, again, a lot more Republican voters. I mean, 100,000 more on the Republican side for Donald Trump. He won by over a percentage point in Florida, whereas Obama won the state, keep in mind, by 0.3% in 2012. So Donald Trump did very well here in the presidential race. I mean, the House has 11 Democrats, 16 Republicans. The Senate went to Rubio. And when we look at this map right here, Donald Trump did win with a plurality again. So again, not the best margin for him, meaning that the Democrats could gain all the other voters and win an election here. But Hillary Clinton got 47.4% of the vote here, and as not so good of a candidate as she was, it means that the Democrat here, especially with an incumbent Democratic senator here, could do very well in this race. I mean, Florida was not a solid GOP state. It is not a GOP state. Donald Trump won by a plurality, meaning the majority of voters did not back the president in 2016, nor did they back the Democrats, but still, that is something to point out as well. So when we look at the primary turnout, again, more Republican voters, same thing that we saw in the presidential election in both Arizona and Florida. So again, pretty much a telling sign, especially since these are swing states. I mean, primary turnout isn't the first thing I look for in other key Republican or Democratic states, such as if we go down to Texas or we go to California. You don't expect more Republican voters to win there, and it really doesn't matter in terms of turnout because that state is pretty much always defined in every presidential election. But these are swing states now, so the numbers truly do matter in terms of turnout. But in other states like maybe North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, it doesn't matter if the Democrats are underperforming or whatever, because those states are already expected to go to the GOP solidly. Let's go ahead and look at the 2018 Arizona Senate race here. So this actually threw me off because I don't know why they're using red and blue for polling here, but right now we're taking a look at the Arizona Senate race, and Kyrsten Sinema is currently leading all of her GOP opponents. I mean, in every single recent poll, she has been leading. I do expect that McSally, after possibly winning the primary tomorrow, I mean, she is leading in the most recent poll by 20%, so that's a very considerable amount. I do expect her to win and then go on and possibly gain back a number of voters, considering that many people are conflicted. But Joe Arpaio obviously polling under at 32%. I mean, it is Joe Arpaio in the Arizona Senate race between Kelly Ward and Kyrsten Sinema. Sinema leads by 10.8%, and then against Martha McSally, she leads by 5.4%. So pretty much it goes down from there. McSally, obviously, the hardest opponent for Kyrsten Sinema at this point in time. But these numbers right now all favor the Democrat. If we don't see what we see here, again, another thing that favors the Democrats. In terms of the Florida Senate race here, not much polling going on, to be completely honest with you. One of the more recent polls, considered more recent by Real Clear Politics, was taken back all the way in Maine. So as you can see here, the margins have pretty much stayed the same all the way from March, leading off into May, and then they stayed until June. And then, of course, they changed up a little bit, but only when a couple new polls come out. Obviously, Florida is a bigger state than Arizona or other states, but still, polling should be readily available for a state as large as this one, especially since that this state is very contested for the Senate race here. The average right now is Rick Scott plus 1.5%. So if we see the numbers here, that only solidifies that this state possibly could do an exact replica of what we saw in 2016, which wouldn't be a huge blowout for the GOP, but pretty good for them. And if we see more Democratic voters, it may show a telling sign for the GOP here. But still, polling numbers still help the GOP with a 1.5% lead, but in Arizona, not so much. So what we see in Arizona definitely will have a much bigger impact in terms of what we see now. I mean, the polling numbers definitely help the Democrats. If we don't see the Republicans ahead in terms of turnout, again, another thing that hurts them. But for right now, the GOP leads in polling, so they can essentially afford to not have as many voters in terms of primary turnout, but still, it's something to look for, especially in a state like Florida. Then we look at the governor's race, not so much contested in Arizona, but in Florida, there is a contested GOP primary and Democratic primary, both candidates, front-runner candidates, leading by around the same amount, but still not that high of a margin for either of them. But the Florida governor race between Graham and DeSantis, currently the Democrat leading by an average of 3.5% with all polls. But then if we look at some other candidates, the other Democrats don't do so well. Pretty much she is the only candidate that is actually shown to be leading in any of these polls, except for maybe one from February. Yes, she led in a February poll, but the more recent one shows her leading as well. So right now, there are two front runners. Actually, the Democrat shows ahead in polling, but can't say the same thing for the incumbent Democrat in the Senate race. So overall, we should be looking for heightened turnout amongst Republicans and maybe a little bit more for Democrats just because this is their year. But still, if we see more Democratic voters, it does not spell out good news for the GOP in Florida and Arizona. Again, two Republican states from 2016, we should be seeing similar things to what we saw in 2016 if the Republicans want to have a shot at these states, especially since Trump won the state of Florida by around 1% and Arizona by around 4%. Neither of these states were safe for Donald Trump. So again, notable things to look at. Thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I'll see you all tomorrow.